clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
All right, welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. So today I had the pleasure of speaking with Steve yet again. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the Clayton Miller case that we covered a few episodes ago. Well, longer than that, but no, it'll be good to have Steve on here and talk about some new stuff. And going forward, we'll talk a little bit about Clayton and his case and where it's at.
It's going well, my friend. I'm happy to be able to speak with you again about Clayton's case, and definitely want you to know how much we appreciate the fact that you spend time on it.
Yeah, that's no problem at all, man.
Well, I do know that, and it's a good thing to know that there's people like you that have the Millers back at times like this, because it's an old story. We're right in the middle of it actually right now. 36 years ago today, Clayton Miller was missing. 36 years ago today, it was a Saturday, May 5th, 1990. And Clayton's parents hadn't seen Clayton all day. He left home the previous evening at 6 o'clock. And his parents didn't realize it at the time, but his plan was to go meet up with his buddies and to do some drinking and to go partying in the woods. There was a large party taking place that night at an area in the woods near the town of New Waterford, Nova Scotia. It was the coming near the end of the school year, and it was the first really nice weather that year. That Friday night was an especially nice evening. A lot of people were out in their yard enjoying the weather, and as a result there were a lot of people who witnessed some of the important things that took place that weekend. Sometime that night, let me break it down. During the night, there were at least 2 raids by New Waterford police of parties that were taking place. There was a large party that was going to take place, it was building up through the evening to a big party that was taking place that night. Around a large fire in the woods, tire fire. Used tires were set on fire to create an area to party around, basically. And there was a separate gathering as well, which took place in the woods also, approximately 400 meters away from the large party that took place later on. It was kind of a pre-party where young folks were gathering in earlier in the evening. Sometime between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, the first raid took place. Now, this raid has never been officially acknowledged by the New Waterford Police Department. They speak freely of a raid, a larger raid that took place later on that night. Sometime after 10 o'clock. Some witnesses say it was closer to 10:30. That particular raid, the New Waterford police claim that the reason that they conducted the raid at that time was because it was shift change at 10 o'clock. And in those days there were 3 officers on duty per shift in New Waterford. So if they conducted the raid at 10 o'clock, they claimed that they would have had 6 officers available to take part in the raid, because there were 3 of them finishing up their shift from 2 to 10, and there were 3 of them coming on the back shift from 10 until, in the morning, 6. So they claimed that they had 6 officers to take part in the raid. Now, when asked to provide the names of the officers that took part in the raid, they gave 6 names. But the problem with this scenario is the fact that one of the 3 officers who was on duty on the 2 to 10 shift that day left early at 8 o'clock. And he was replaced by one of the officers who was going to be working on the back shift from 10 until 6, he came in early. So that eliminates one of the original 6 officers, and that number that's available to take part in the raid at 10 o'clock becomes 5 instead of 6. Another of the officers claimed that he never left the station during the time of the raid, that he remained there as the desk sergeant type officer in charge at the office, and as a result of him never leaving the station, that reduces the number of officers of those original 6 who were available to take part in the 10 o'clock raid down to 4. But strangely enough, there were still 6 officers who took part in the raid. 6 names provided as the officers that took part in that raid. But when you add in the officer who left early and the one who remained at the police station allegedly, then you've got 8 officers involved instead of 6. Things like these small details, which I find quite significant, and the Millers do as well, are things that have never apparently been followed up on by anybody who investigated, and I use air quotes around investigated because in 36 years there's been no proper investigation of Clayton's case. But there have been plenty who have claimed to have done so. So back to the story. Clayton left home that night during the first raid that took place between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. During the minutes leading up to that first raid and during the raid itself. And when I say a raid, this is not a huge operation. It appears to have been a couple of New Waterford police on foot that have been on patrol and have noticed activity in the woods, young people coming and going, mostly coming, not going. But this was only a couple of New Waterford cops. The one that took place later on that night that they acknowledge involved more officers for sure. They claim 6, but the names provided by witnesses that night who were witnesses to the police involved in the actions that took place that night provide other names besides those 6. Just prior to the arrival on the scene at between 8:30 and 9 of New Waterford police officers, 2 I believe at that time, Clayton was involved in an assault for the first time. There is little doubt that Clayton was intoxicated, although his blood alcohol reading from the autopsy returned a reading of 0.12, which the Dr. Ikejani, who had performed the original autopsy on Clayton Miller, in his autopsy report, he referred to it as mere, M-E-R-E, mere intoxication. So merely intoxicated. 0.8 is the allowable limit for driving. Clayton is 0.12 instead of 0.08, so he's half again is over what it would take to put you to the legal limit. By that reading, he's not overly drunk. However, the time that the reading is taken and the calculations of blood alcohol would lead to believe that it would have been higher, in fact, than that earlier. I'm not suggesting that Clayton was merely intoxicated at the time that these things took place, because it appears that he and his 2 friends drank a bottle of moonshine between them. Moonshine is powerful alcohol. Clayton was not a big fella, and they were only 17-year-olds. They were not experienced drinkers. They drank a fair bit of shine in a fairly short period of time. So they would certainly be well under the influence. One of Clayton's buddies, his cousin Dale McKinnon, who was with him that night, he has told investigators that he remembers almost nothing for a long stretch of time that night because of his state of intoxication. He has told investigators that he was much more intoxicated than Clayton and the third guy that was with them. And as a result, he has very little memory of a long stretch of what took place that night. But Clayton, just prior to the first arrival of the police that night, had an encounter based on a witness that came forward and had an interview. She says Clayton was preparing to leave the area, and as he walked past a young girl who was sitting on the ground, he lost his balance and put his hand down, and when he did, his hand went between the legs of that young girl. And she was wearing a skirt, and his hand went between her knees or somewhere in that area, and her boyfriend, who was sitting next to her, did not take that well. According to this witness, at that point, that her boyfriend jumped up and began to assault Clayton with kicks to the head. In the midst of that, somebody hollers out, "Cops." That was when someone first noticed the arrival of New Waterford police in the area. And according to this witness, at that point, this individual stopped kicking Clayton and ran away. Shortly after, Clayton regained his composure and jumped to his feet and began to run away as well, based on this witness's information. Now, a couple of days after Clayton's body was found, there was a witness who gave a statement to New Waterford police, and when she was asked about what took place, she said, "When the police arrived and we all had to run, we ran along the road and we took off towards the power transformers and out over the racetrack." Now, people who are familiar with the town of New Waterford could tell you exactly where she's referring to, because if you are, what she's describing is a very specific location. There is an area near the area where Clayton was found and where these parties took place, where there is a circular track. It appears to have been at one time used for the training of harness racing horses. At least that's what I believe it was for. And just off to the side of that track, there is a couple of very large power transformer operations of some sort, fenced in, very large Nova Scotia Power type units. And when this witness says that they're coming along the road, they're heading towards the power transformers out over the racetrack, there is no question about where she's referring to. This area that she refers to is approximately 425 meters away from where Clayton's body was eventually found on Sunday morning. The party was on Friday night. On Saturday, Clayton couldn't be found by anybody, and there were many people looking for him, including a group of 12 to 15 people from Cape Breton Search and Rescue who searched the brook specifically for Clayton. They did so on Saturday, beginning at approximately 4 p.m. They searched the brook on Saturday and found nothing. This is 12 to 15 people, and this is not a large brook. This brook, at that time, at its widest area, was probably not much more than 6 feet wide, and very rarely deeper than a foot or two, in some cases less than that. And they were 1 arm's length apart. We heard a detailed description of what took place during the search from the gentleman who coordinated the search, who came forward in 2017 and made it known that he had been a part of this search and gave us the details in a 1-hour interview. He described in the first half hour of the interview all of his qualifications and showed us how he was as highly trained as an individual can be in this country when it comes to leading the search for a missing person. And then the second half hour was the detailed description of the actual search that they carried out that day. So Clayton went missing on Friday. Didn't come home Friday night. His parents began calling the New Waterford Police Department at approximately 1:10 or 15. after they had heard from calling around checking with other people. They had heard that there was a party in the woods that night and that the New Waterford police had raided the party and taken some young people into custody. As a result, Clayton's father called the New Waterford Police Department after 1 a.m. rather, and inquired there whether or not Clayton may have been taken in or picked up at the time, or if there was any information regarding his whereabouts. And at the time, Clayton's father, Jervy, was told that when the officer checked the names on the list of those who had been taken in, that Clayton was not among them. So that was the first call. The next morning at approximately 9:30 a.m., Clayton's mother called the New Waterford police station just to check and see if they had heard anything overnight or whatever. By that time, they were quite concerned about Clayton, because it was not like him to not come home and not let them know why he hadn't come home. So they called. Maureen called again at 9:30. Clayton's mother. Then she went out selling Girl Guide cookies with her daughter, and when they returned at approximately 11:30, she called again. Now, according to the gentleman from Cape Breton Search and Rescue, it was approximately noon that his superior, the head of Cape Breton Search and Rescue, received a call from the chief of the New Waterford Police Department, and he was requesting a meeting with the folks from Cape Breton Search and Rescue, because at that time Cape Breton Search and Rescue had not worked with the New Waterford Police Department before. They were fairly new at the time, newly established. So as a result, the gentleman who was in charge of Cape Breton Search and Rescue called the gentleman who gave us the interview, because he was actually from New Waterford and was familiar with the police the hierarchy at the New Waterford Police Department. He knew the chief and the deputy chief, so he had him come along to the meeting. This gentleman told us in great detail all about the search that they carried out and the fact that there most definitely was no body in the brook. Without any question, he was completely firm in his assertion that they were a professional search organization. There were 12 to 15 people, one arm's length apart from each other, and they went up one side of the brook and down the other, and without any question, there was no sign of Clayton Miller in that brook on Saturday. Now, the important part of all of the story is that Clayton was found in that brook on Sunday morning. And the official claim to this day is that he had been there since Friday night. Obviously, if he had been there since Friday night, the people who were searching for him on Saturday would have found him. And an important thing to note about the search for Clayton is the fact that when he left home, he was wearing a bright red hooded sweatshirt, and when he was found, he was wearing it as well. So the searchers who were searching a brook that's 6 feet wide at its widest would have had to have missed a 5'7" body with a bright red sweatshirt on it, laying partially in the brook while searching the brook specifically the day before. So there is no way that they would have missed Clayton in the brook that day. But the next day, when Clayton is found, he's found in the brook, in an area of the brook which was most certainly covered the previous day by 12 to 15 professional search people. Excuse me. When Clayton's body was found, it was found in the morning. However, and those that found Clayton's body are the two guys that he was partying with that night. The two guys that he split the bottle with are the same guys that found him on Sunday morning. Now, what isn't quite known, what is not well explained, is how it is that the reality is, according to the New Waterford Police Department complaints logbook, they received a call at 1:50, 10 to 2, on Sunday afternoon, from the mother of one of the guys that found Clayton's body. His name was Dale McKinnon. Dale's mother, according to the logbook, made a call to the station at 10 minutes to 2 on Sunday afternoon, reporting that her son had found, and his friend had found Clayton's body in the brook, and he was dead. The problem with that is that we know from multiple sources that the actual discovery of Clayton's body took place that morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. The family, Dale McKinnon's family, were aware early on Sunday morning, based on information from witnesses, that Clayton was dead in the brook. And for whatever reason, they failed to make the Miller family aware of it. Instead of calling the Millers and telling them that Dale had found Clayton, allegedly, sometime in the afternoon, Mrs. McKinnon calls the New Waterford Police Department instead to report to them that her son has found a body in the brook. At 11 o'clock, approximately, on Sunday morning, Mrs. McKinnon called the Miller home, and when Maureen, Clayton's mother, answered the phone, she asked her, "Have you heard anything about Clayton yet?" And Maureen said no, and she said okay, and hung up the phone, basically. And then she thought, that's a strange thing to ask. Why did typically you'd say, "Have you heard from Clayton?" or "Did Clayton come home?" or whatever. What she asked was, "Have you heard anything about Clayton yet?" Maureen later found out, Clayton's mother, that from two separate friends, that they had been called on the phone prior to 10:30 on Sunday morning from Mrs. McKinnon, and both had been told about Clayton being dead in the brook and being found by Dale. She called two different friends before 10:30 in the morning and told them that Dale had found Clayton dead in the brook. At 11 o'clock, she called Maureen Miller and asked her, "Have you heard anything yet about Clayton?" So it sounds to me as though she had expected that by that time one of those two people that she told would have called Maureen, and that's how she would have found out about Clayton, and it would have saved Mrs. McKinnon from having to call the Millers and give them that information herself. Why or how that worked out the way that it did is a very strange thing. But it is certainly a fact that two people came forward and told Maureen that they had heard from Mrs. McKinnon early on Sunday morning about Clayton being dead. And after that, when Mrs. McKinnon called Maureen Miller, she didn't tell her about Clayton being dead. She asked if she had heard anything about Clayton yet. Later in the day, after the call was made to the New Waterford Police Department, apparently Mrs. McKinnon then was driven by someone to Gervais Miller. Gervais is Clayton's father. Gervais worked at a local nearby power plant at the time, and Mrs. McKinnon was driven from her home to the power plant, where she spoke to Gervais and told him personally about Dale finding Clayton in the brook. She still didn't let Mrs. Miller know that. And when Mrs. Miller heard keys in the door, I can't remember the time exactly that she told me. I think she said it was 2:13. That she heard the keys in the door, she thought, "Thank God, it's Clayton. He's finally come home." Because only Clayton and Gervais had keys, and Gervais at work. So when she looks up to see Clayton come through the door, it's not Clayton coming through the door, it's Gervais. And right behind him is Mrs. McKinnon. And Gervais says something to Maureen along the lines of, "Is it true about Clayton being dead?" And Maureen said, "Of course not. What are you talking about?" And while she's saying that, she looks over Gervais' shoulder and sees Mrs. McKinnon standing behind him, nodding her head. And that is how Maureen Miller found out that her only son had turned up dead in the brook. Now, at that point, Mrs. McKinnon volunteered to remain there and babysit the younger daughter of the Millers, so they could leave and go to Clayton. And when I say go to Clayton, I mean exactly that, because they found out they didn't know exactly where the area was when described to them of where Clayton had ended up. But they flagged someone down quickly in traffic when they left home and asked them where this particular area was, and they knew, and they drove them there. They led them there. The Millers followed them there. And when they arrived at the particular area, the closest they could get with the cars to where Clayton was approximately 425 meters away. And when they started walking in, Mr. Miller spoke to Mrs. and said, do you want me to wait and walk in with you, because she couldn't walk as quickly as he could, or go ahead. And he took off ahead. She said, go ahead. So he took off ahead and got there probably a couple of minutes quicker than she did. When he did arrive there, he went down a steep bank, because Clayton was at the bottom of a steep bank in a brook, partially in a brook. His upper body was in the brook. His legs were on the bank of the brook. And his mouth and his face was in the water. His face was turned to one side. He was laying face down. His face, mouth, and nose were underwater, so as any parent would do, he immediately ran right to him and pulled his face and nose out of the water. It was far too late to be any good for Clayton, but it's an automatic response, I'm sure, for a parent when they'd see something like that. At that particular time, there was only one police officer on the scene, a detective sergeant, and he did nothing whatsoever to stop Jervy from going directly to Clayton's body where it was in the brook, and from disturbing the scene when he picked the body up out of the brook. In fact, after Jervy had picked up the body and hugged it to his chest, based on witnesses have said, Jervy told the officer that he was going to move Clayton's body so that his face wasn't underwater. And what actually happened was the police officer took one shoulder and Jervy took the other, and the two of them dragged Clayton's body forward a couple of feet to a position where the face was no longer in the water. So the detective on the scene didn't just allow Jervy to disturb Clayton's body. He helped him to disturb the body. Once he lifted the body up out of the water himself, Jervy did, the officer on the scene actually helped him to move the body forward. From there, based on the reports of the New Waterford police that claimed to have been at the scene that day, they say they arrived at the scene at 2:20, and it was approximately 2:30 to 2:35. Oh wait, now I'm getting my numbers mixed up here. No, it was approximately 2:35 when the Millers arrived. By about 2:45, Clayton's body had been put on a stretcher, loaded in an ambulance, and it was leaving the scene. Now, the numbers that I told you were accurate in the first place. 2:20 p.m., the New Waterford police arrive on the scene. By 3 o'clock, Clayton's body is at the New Waterford hospital. And from the location where the body was picked up and the speed that the ambulance would take to get out of there, it would have been probably 10 to 15 minutes to get to the hospital, which is not that far away. It was a very rough area for the ambulance to get into. But it has to have been one of the shortest death investigations of any on record, considering that the body is leaving the scene approximately 25 minutes after the police arrive at the scene. Clayton's body in the brook, there were no measurements taken. There were no diagrams or sketches of any kind created. They basically walked up to the scene. allowed Clayton's father to come to the scene to disrupt the body where it was located in the brook. Put the body on a gurney, put the gurney in the ambulance, took the ambulance away to the hospital. There was no investigation, and there has never been any explanation for why it was treated the way it was. People who saw Clayton that day, I spoke 2 days ago with Clayton's one of Clayton's aunts, and she was telling me about the condition he was in when he came to the hospital that day. There's no question in her mind that Clayton was kicked to death, or at least kicked to some very serious injuries, if that's not what resulted in his death. She totally believed that the side of his face was bashed in, basically. And what she describes completely corresponds with what I've seen myself. I've seen the photos from Clayton at the hospital that day, and I've got them blown up to enlargements, every one of them. And in some of those, well, very few of them actually are revealing enough to see it, but the first time I looked at them, I told Clayton's mother I totally believe that his left eye socket is crushed. And a few years later, we ended up acquiring a couple of x-rays from Clayton's re-autopsy, and one of them is of the front of his skull, looking from front to back. And to me, that x-ray completely confirms what I believed prior, because I'm not a radiologist or any other kind of a medical expert, but I know that when you look at an x-ray of someone's skull and you're looking at them front on, one side should look the same as the other. You should have symmetry here. But in Clayton's case, around his left eye socket, there's a large area of black, where on the opposite side there is white. And the white is from bone. And I completely believe that the black on the other side is from lack of bone, because that bone has been broken and has been displaced and is no longer where it used to be around his eye socket. There is also a photo among those taken of Clayton at the hospital the day the body was found, that has been altered. And it has been altered in such a way that Clayton's left eye appears to be shaded to the point where you can't see any detail. It looked strange to me, that photo, so I started manipulating characteristics of it on my computer. I'm quite into photography for a long time, and most photos, if the shade is genuine, can have that shaded areas affected by adjusting. There are shadows and highlights and different settings on the camera or the photo programs that will let you alter or manipulate those things. But with that particular photo, I could do all I wanted to do with it, and I couldn't make this particular dark area right across Clayton's left eye go away. To me, it looks very much like it was done with a black marker or some kind of a highlighting tool of some sort. But it's most certainly been doctored, to use a better word. So it also, that also contributes to my belief that Clayton's left eye socket has been shattered. There's a reason why someone doesn't want us to see it, that's for sure. And they went to the point where they went to whatever work it would take to actually alter that photo so that when people looked at it, they got a false impression of what it showed. Then I combine that with what I saw myself when I looked at the photos, and the words of Clayton's aunt, who were actually, she literally bent down to kiss the body that day. She was inches away from Clayton's face, and she believes that his head was kicked in that day, basically, is what she told me the other day when I met her on the weekend. There is little doubt that Clayton was very seriously damaged, assaulted. I told the story earlier about how he was assaulted the first time and got up and ran away. Now, there was the girl that was interviewed and told about running along the road and out over the racetrack towards the power transformers, also told that while they were running, Clayton was running behind her, and he was hollering about his hat, and he was hollering that he had lost his hat. Has anybody seen my hat? Something along those lines. Now, he went there wearing a hat. He gets involved in an altercation with someone who kicks him in the head multiple times, and from there jumps up and runs away from the police. So it's entirely logical that after being kicked in the head 2 or 3 times, the hat that was previously on Clayton's head would no longer be there. So when he gets up and starts running away, and he's hollering about my hat, I lost my hat, whatever, okay, that makes perfectly logical sense to me if he's just been kicked in the head a few times, as the witness who came forward previously told us that he had been. Now, the witness that was interviewed by New Waterford Police a couple of days after Clayton was found, she said that when they were running along the road towards the power transformers and out over the racetrack, that Clayton was behind them, her and those that she was with, and that he was hollering about his hat. He had lost his hat. Has anybody seen my hat? Something along those lines. And that he would be saying something like that, to me, is completely logical, because based on what we're told by the witness, Clayton was kicked in the head multiple times, 2 or 3 times, by a guy wearing steel-toed boots. And it's entirely likely that if you're kicked in the head 2 or 3 times by somebody while you're wearing a hat, unless that hat is awfully well established on your head, the odds are pretty good it's going to end up coming off during the conflict. So, Clayton's getting kicked in the head multiple times. According to the witness, he may have passed out a little during it all, but quickly regained consciousness, and as soon as he did, he jumped to his feet and began to run like everybody else did, because he was scared of being captured by the New Waterford Police. So as he's running along behind her, it's totally logical that when she says that she heard him hollering about losing his hat, that makes perfectly logical sense to me if he's just been kicked in the head a few times. So the next piece of the puzzle that followed that one for me when trying to put it all together was a statement given by a woman from New Waterford who claimed that on Monday morning she drove an individual to vocational school. There was this person that she used to pick up and drive back and forth to school because they were both taking the same welding course at the time. And that he described to her on Monday morning what had gone on Friday night. And he described to her the beating that he and his cousin had put on this individual, who at some stage during the description, according to this woman, he had actually claimed that it was that cocky Miller kid, is how he described the person that they put the beating on. Allegedly he told her that when the raid took place and everybody scattered because they were running from the police, they watched where he ran. They got a hold of him near the racetrack, and they dragged him into the bushes and then proceeded to beat the severe crap out of him, basically, based on his description. Now, the important part of it is that he told this person, allegedly, that because Clayton wouldn't shut up while they're putting the beating on him, he was hollering and screaming through it, and because he wouldn't shut up, and I suspect that the reason they want him to shut up is because this is taking place literally while the police are in the area. They're raiding this small party that's taking place in the woods. And while that's taking place, these guys, because Clayton is running from the police, and according to this witness, he told her, we watched where he ran when he was running from the police, and that's when they grabbed him and dragged him in the woods and put the beating on him. So if they're putting the beating on him while he's running from police, the police are still in the area, so there's probably a good reason why they didn't want him making much noise. So this person says that she was told by this individual that because Clayton wouldn't shut up, he shut him up. He says, I put the sleeper hold on him and put him out. Now, the really important part about that is the fact that when Clayton's autopsy was conducted, the doctor who performed the autopsy concluded that Clayton's death was the result of asphyxiation. And if you were put in a chokehold until you're unconscious, and maybe a little too long, then you could certainly end up dead from asphyxiation, because that's what a chokehold is. Now, what I wanted to focus on tonight, Chris, although it's all basically been a lead up to it so far, is details that are contained in the medical reports in Clayton's case. Because people don't know, like nobody knows this stuff. The Millers know because they've had them all these years, but even they didn't actually realize what was being said in the reports, because they're not medical specialists, or they're not trained in the language of post-mortem information, and neither am I, and nor would I ever claim to be. But what I do have is Google, and I put it to good use when I came across terminology that I wasn't familiar with, and there was a lot of it. But the main thing point that I want to get across to you is the fact that although I didn't do it in the proper order, the way that I wished I had now that I had the hindsight in my rearview mirror, because Dr. Riccigiani, who performed the initial autopsy, came away with the conclusion that Clayton had died of asphyxiation, and he told police that evening that he was certain that Clayton's death was from asphyxiation. However, when the report was released, when the actual autopsy report itself was released weeks later, the copy that was provided to the Miller family had nothing inserted under the heading of cause of death, strangely enough. Now, he's certain after the autopsy that Clayton died from asphyxiation, and according to the RCMP handwritten notes, certain is underlined, and in quotes, he was certain that Clayton's death was from asphyxiation. And the report, when released, has nothing listed under cause of death, which is extremely strange, I believe. Another thing that was included in the autopsy report is under the heading of pathological diagnosis. Dr. Riccigiani had inserted pulmonary emphysema. Now, Clayton definitely didn't have emphysema. He didn't have any breathing issues or anything of that nature at all. He was a very healthy 17-year-old. But although I didn't do it this way when I created this report that I put together, and by the way, this is, like I mentioned earlier, I've been at this now for 11 years since we first got started with the Millers. And over that time, I've put together numerous packages of information, I'd call them. I've basically got 7 binders so far filled with information, evidence from the case. When I initially got involved, my main role was going through 17,000 pages that the Millers had received from the RCMP in redacted form, to separate out what might be something that could be productive, something that would be important, that actually had evidentiary value, compared to letters or communications between one office and the other that were insignificant as far as the actual establishment of what had actually taken place. So as a result, I ended up putting multiple things together. I did one on the New Waterford Police, when able to compare fatality inquiry testimony with police reports that were actually written that weekend, the weekend that Clayton died, and compared with what these New Waterford police officers told the RCMP when they were interviewed by them, or by any other statements that information that could be compared. My main thing that I wanted to do was take each officer individually and compare everything that I had that they had told people about that weekend, and see which ones were consistent or which ones were inconsistent, or exactly how they went. And there is certainly no consistency among the information provided by those police officers that weekend. The variations in the story are incredible, and to me what's even more incredible is the fact that anybody could ever have claimed to investigate this case and not started off by doing things like that. You take, these guys gave information at a fatality inquiry in September about a case they were involved in May, and obviously those words, you want to take those words and you want to compare them with what they said in the reports that they wrote the weekend that it took place, or what they told the RCMP. I'm not an investigator, but to me it seems obvious that if I was, or if whoever was, these are some of the places that you would start. You would obviously not be able to explain how they claimed to have 6 officers to conduct a raid at 10 o'clock if 2 of those 6 were unavailable to take part in the raid. You've only got 4. Okay, but they claimed they had 6 anyway. They gave 6 names anyway. If you're investigating, these are the kind of things that you've got to dig into and say, well, how the hell did this happen? There are so many things like that in this case. It's mind-boggling, but I don't want to get too far off track with this. My point is, I put together these different packages and reports over the years as I went through the information and was able to pull it out and separate it out, and then gather it with others like information, for instance. But my point is that the medical information was the last thing that I tackled, and I had already been into it for 9 or 10 or however many years at that time. But the reason that I didn't tackle it first is because, or any sooner, is because I didn't know, like I literally wasn't aware of what they were saying as far as the terminology in a lot of cases. But then I thought, what the hell, if I come across, when I come across something I don't understand, I'll Google it and I can understand it then. My main thing that I wanted to be able to do is to compare, again, like I did with it's the whole investigative process. It seems kind of boils down to comparative analysis or whatever, whether you're comparing what the police told in different versions at periods of time, or what doctors said through the years when they're looking at the actual physical samples from Clayton's autopsy. Because the important part of it all is that they gave very detailed descriptions, in some cases, of what they saw microscopically in Clayton's lung tissue samples. And the reason that the lung tissue samples are so important is because Dr. Ikejani claims that Clayton died of asphyxiation, and asphyxiation is lack of oxygen. So,
right.
When I started gathering this medical information, basically all the reports that were, and I have access to everything that the Millers have access to. They've been so good as far as all of that. Anything that's new, as soon as it's new, I'm informed of it basically. And because I had everything that they had, I had all the medical reports, and it started as early as Clayton's initial autopsy was conducted on May 7th, 1990. On June 7th of 1990, exactly 1 month later, a doctor in Halifax named Dr. Fraser, who worked at the Camp Hill Hospital, he wrote a report And his report was written in response to Dr. Ikejani sending him samples of Clayton Miller's tissue. At the time, Dr. Fraser would have been one of the senior pathologists in the province, and he wrote a detailed description of what he had seen. It started as soon as then, and it has gone as far as 2015, I believe. Yeah, 2015. Tissue slides in digital form from Clayton's original autopsy were sent to doctors in Brazil. 2 doctors in Brazil who knew absolutely nothing about Clayton's case. They're experts in their field. One of them is a lung pathologist specifically. They were given absolutely no background information on Clayton's case and knew nothing. All they got were the 14 tissue slides, and they were asked for their professional opinion of what they observed on the slides. So it's gone from the first 1 month after Clayton died in 1990 to as far as 2015, which was 25 and a half years basically, by the time that report came from those doctors in Brazil, of doctors actually examining physical samples from Clayton and describing what they had seen. Now, the important part of it all is the terminology, because while I was well into writing my own report, like 20 pages into a 45-page report, it dawned on me that I should run a Google search of, quote, signs of death by asphyxiation, unquote. So when I ran that search, what returned to me was a list of indicators, basically. And among those, one of them said microscopic lungs. And then it gave 6 individual terms which you would look for microscopically in the lungs of an individual who had died of asphyxiation. And those 6 terms are the following: acute pulmonary emphysema with septal rupture, and hemorrhage, foreign bodies aspiration. Excuse me, aspiration means breathed, inhaled. Foreign bodies inhaled means that you basically suck something into your lungs. Congestion, interstitial and intraalveolar edema, and alveolar hemorrhage. Okay, now, of those 6 individual terms, of which are, to those that know, signs to look for microscopically in the lungs of someone who has died from asphyxiation, of those 6 individual terms that were provided in response to my search, those doctors in Brazil used 5 of those 6 terms exactly, to word for word, when they described what they saw in Clayton's lungs. When I was putting this report together, I did an online search actually of these 2 particular doctors from Brazil that had given us their expertise. And when I did, I saw that one of them, who is specifically a forensic pathologist, has had medical articles published. Oh no, sorry, that's the wrong one. Yeah, right, that's the other doctor. One of them is a forensic pathologist. He's had articles published online 43 times. And the other is a professor who is a lung pathologist specifically, and she has been published 562 times online or wherever in her field. Now, obviously, someone who has been published 562 times knows what she's talking about. And the first thing that appears on her list of skills and expertise is histology. And histology is exactly what we needed her for, because histology is the study of microscopic anatomy of cells and tissues. And that's what we were asking them to do. We're asking for her to take a look at these tissues on the slide and tell us exactly what she sees. So there's absolutely no question whatsoever that that doctor is highly qualified to examine lung tissue specimens and to determine exactly whether or not there's any abnormalities in what she sees. And what they saw was very, very different than what another particular doctor ended up seeing. I'll get to him in a minute. But what she said in the report was, quote, "The examination of the airways drew attention by the presence of a foreign body occupying and occluding the lumen. The foreign body represents irregular shape, intense brownish color, and is slightly birefringent under polarized light." Now, they also included in their report a series of 4 microscopic photographs at 4 different magnification levels that indicate and highlight this foreign body that they're referring to. Obviously, there is something in Clayton's lung tissue that shouldn't be there, and that's what they're referring to. Now, they also included in their report, they went on to say, quote, "We think the findings in this case are diagnostic of intense anoxia/hypoxia pattern associated with a foreign body occluding the airways." Now, because I looked it up, I can tell you that occluding the airways means blocking it off. For instance, if you were eating grapes and you got one caught in your throat and air couldn't get in or out, that grape is occluding your airways, so that's a blockage. And my belief is that the reason that their first supposition was that the anoxia-hypoxia pattern was the result of occlusion of the airway. The reason that they may have believed that initially is because they knew that there was some foreign body in Clayton's lungs. Something made it down as far as his lungs, but something else may have got stuck in his throat, and that may have been the reason for the anoxia/hypoxia pattern. And I'll let you know that an online search of the definition of anoxia-hypoxia returned the following, quote, "Anoxia and hypoxia are both severe life-threatening conditions in which a person is experiencing oxygen deprivation." So the bottom line is anoxia and hypoxia are a deprivation and complete deprivation of oxygen. And that is what these experts say was the reason for Clayton's death. Now, despite the fact that their first inclination was a foreign body occluding the airway, which is blocking it off, as I said, they went on to say, quote, "The findings in turn are consistent with mechanical asphyxia by suffocation, including environmental suffocation and choking." Now, obviously, it's not a case of environmental suffocation, because that would be a situation where, for instance, someone is welding inside a big metal tank, and there's a limited amount of oxygen inside the tank, and because you're in there breathing and running a torch and whatever else, you use up all the oxygen in the tank, and there's nothing left for you to breathe. Well, this is clearly not the case with Clayton. Clayton was outside. He's out in the fresh air. This is certainly not a case of environmental suffocation. And the other option is choking. They also continue to say, "We recommend continuing the investigation of the case, confronting the findings with other forensic investigation during the death circumstance. It would be very important that the foreign body described inside of the airways were chemically analyzed by mass spectroscopy or eventually by scanning electron microscope equipped with backscattered electron imaging and energy dispersive X-ray analyzer," unquote. Now, these doctors, or that doctor, is obviously not aware. First of all, they have no knowledge that the case that they're dealing with is already 25 years old at that time. As well, there was never any further investigation, and there probably never will be, not by this government, or the way it's been in the past at least, to further analyze any foreign objects in the lungs of Clayton Miller. And part of that is because in 1993, shortly after Christmas, Clayton's remains were exhumed from his grave, and a re-autopsy was conducted. When the re-autopsy was conducted, the doctor who performed the re-autopsy concluded that Clayton's cause of death was hypothermia. Now, in 1991, after the RCMP had investigated Clayton's case as part of a larger investigation regarding the New Waterford Police Department, the officer in charge of the investigation sent a letter to the doctor who had conducted the original autopsy on Clayton's remains, Dr. Riccajani. And in the letter, the RCMP staff sergeant suggested that Dr. Riccajani consider hypothermia as the cause of death, and let him know what he thought about that, basically. Dr. Riccajani wrote him back a letter, and in that letter he explained some of the signs of death by hypothermia, and how few of those signs he had seen when he conducted the autopsy, which was none, basically. He let me see if I can find it here. Okay. What he said in response in his letter, Dr. Riccajani, was the following, quote, "I do not accept the suggestion that Clayton Miller died of hypothermia, as there are no changes seen which will be attributed to the stagnation of blood as a result of hemoconcentration and slugging." And what he means by that, because I've looked it up, is basically what happens when someone dies of hypothermia is because your body is so cold, your blood thickens and doesn't flow through your veins the way it should, to the point where eventually your heart's no longer pumping and you die. And that's what he's referring to when he's talking about hemoconcentration and slugging. That's the hemoconcentration would be the thickening of the blood. Under that, in his letter, he lists the following: there was no frostbite or gangrene of tissue, especially of toes and fingers. There were no red patches or blisters anywhere on the skin. There were no bluish anoxic patches on the shoulders, knees, hands, and feet. There was no deterioration of tissues such as hemorrhagic pancreatitis, gastric and mucosal ulcerations, pulmonary hemorrhages, fatty degeneration of liver, renal tubules, and myocardium. Clayton's autopsy findings did not show any evidence of myxedema and cerebral infarcts or hemorrhages, which are predisposing factors of hypothermia. There was no generalized edema, red discoloration of the face and extremities due to lack of oxygen dissociation of the blood, nor abdominal distension due to paralytic ileus, which would be the case if death was due to hypothermia. In the absence of the above, Clayton Miller could not have died of hypothermia. These are the words of the doctor who actually performed the autopsy on Clayton Miller when asked to consider hypothermia as the cause of death. There is absolutely no question that he's ruling out hypothermia as the cause of the death of the individual that he performed the autopsy on. However, when Dr. Butt came across the country from Calgary and performed the re-autopsy on the remains of Clayton Miller in December of 1993, he came away concluding that hypothermia was Clayton's cause of death. And to this day, it still remains Clayton's cause of death. Now, what I'm really wanting to highlight with this discussion with you tonight, Chris, is the fact that the only doctor who actually examined the remains of Clayton Miller that specifically came away with the conclusion that hypothermia was the cause of death is this doctor, Dr. Butt. Now, when the Miller family went to the government and requested a re-autopsy be performed on Clayton's remains to better determine cause of death, and specifics that needed to be established. They also requested that the doctor who performed it have absolutely no connection with the government of Nova Scotia, with New Waterford Police or Cape Breton Police or whatever. They wanted someone who would look at this the way the doctors in Brazil looked at the slides that we sent them years later. And they were assured by the government that they would be provided with a doctor with absolutely no connection, with no previous history with the government of Nova Scotia and this type of thing. And the doctor who came to do the operation, or not the operation, but to perform the procedure, was Dr. Butt, Dr. John Butt from Calgary. He was a highly regarded pathologist. He's the man that came and did the operation, did the procedure, and like I say, he came away with the conclusion that Clayton's death was from hypothermia. Now, you heard earlier what those doctors in Brazil concluded without any question: hypoxia. What was the other one? Apoxia, hypoxia, whatever it was. It's definitely deprivation of oxygen is what they saw. Now, hypothermia and asphyxiation could almost hardly be further apart, because asphyxiation is sudden death. You're choked out right now. You're not getting oxygen to your brain or blood to the brain, and you die suddenly. Hypothermia takes hours in the cold to actually take your life. A couple of important details that are in the files regarding Clayton are that at the fatality inquiry that was conducted in September of 1990, an RCMP alcohol expert gave testimony wherein he stated that based on the calculations from the numbers that he had been given, both Clayton's size and the alcohol consumed and the hours, etc., he had concluded, based on the formula, that Clayton was dead within the hour and a half following 10:30. In other words, he's dead by midnight. And he stated this twice during his testimony. He gave it early on, and then at some point later they had questioned him again on it, and he repeated what I had said was dead within an hour and a half of 10:30. So if this particular individual is correct with his calculation based on a well-established formula, Clayton couldn't possibly have died of hypothermia and been dead by midnight, because they claim that he fell in the brook at 10 o'clock when he was running away from police, and he's only been there for 2 hours between 10 and midnight. In the conditions that night, it would be physically impossible to have died of hypothermia. And another very important detail along those lines is that the doctor, his name is Dr. Roach, who filled out the death certificate for Clayton Miller, he indicated that the date of death on the form is May 4th, 1990. So by the same logic, excuse me, if the date on the form is May 4th, then it means Clayton is dead before midnight, or it would have been May 5th. If Clayton is dead before midnight, then it's impossible that Dr. Roach believes Clayton died of hypothermia. He could not conceivably have died of hypothermia in 2 hours with the weather conditions on that night. So over time, when the Nova Scotia government told the Millers that Dr. Butt had no previous professional relationship with Nova Scotia, that wasn't exactly true, because we found out since then that if you look up Dr. John Butt, his CV, which is what they call a resume for a doctor, his is pages and pages and pages, but somewhere deep in that CV, he has a section which he lists, which he heads as committees, boards, and consultations. And under that heading, he lists the following, quote, consultant to Deputy Attorney General, Province of Nova Scotia, on the medical examiner's system, 1991. So according to Dr. Butt, on his curriculum vitae, I think what it stands for. Anyway, his resume, he states that in 1991 he was working in Nova Scotia with the Deputy Attorney General for the province of Nova Scotia on the establishment of the medical examiner system. Okay, now, that's 1991. When Clayton's re-autopsy takes place in 1993, and the Millers ask for a doctor with no connection to the Nova Scotia government, this is the guy that they send to do the re-autopsy. And not only do they send him, but when they tell the Millers that no, he's got no previous relationship with us. In fact, they actually got a letter at one stage from a guy who was at the time the Justice Minister for the province of Nova Scotia.
Right.
And in that letter, he wrote, part of what he says includes the following, quote, Dr. Butt had no previous professional relationship with the province before coming here to conduct the re-autopsy of Clayton's remains at your request. That is complete bullshit. They brought a ringer in for this because 2 years earlier he was here helping them set up the medical examiner system. Why would they bring somebody back 2 years later and tell the Millers that he has no previous professional relationship with the province of Nova Scotia when he was here 2 years earlier helping them set up the medical examiner system? Does that seem unusual?
Odd. A little bit.
That, to me, that seems very unusual. Of all the doctors in this country, why are you bringing back one that was already here a couple of years ago working for you? And telling the Millers that he's got no professional relationship with the province. Okay, we know that that's definitely something that took place. Other things that we know that took place are when Dr. Butt came here and conducted the re-autopsy. He went back to Calgary with the specimens that he had collected. He had a new set of x-rays done up. He had tissue slides done. When he went back to Calgary, he sent off brain tissue slides. 3 brain tissue slides from Clayton's original autopsy. All of the original autopsy slides were sent, for some reason unknown, to Dr. Butt on January 6th of 1994. Just after a week or so after he had been here and done or a little more than that, I guess, after he had been here and done the re-autopsy. 17 tissue slides were sent from Nova Scotia to Dr. Butt, but allegedly only 14 have ever been returned to this day. It is claimed by the current Nova Scotia Chief Medical Examiner that the 3 slides of Clayton's brain tissue that were originally sent to Dr. Butt on January 6th of 1994 have never been returned to the province of Nova Scotia. Now, while he had those slides in his possession in Calgary, Dr. Butt sent them off to a neuropathologist. So they study brain tissue of dead people. I'm guessing by the name neuropathology. Anyway, the bottom line is she's a brain expert. And based on what she said in her report that she sent back to Dr. Butt, which he included in the re-autopsy, he included her report in the re-autopsy, but he completely ignored the opinions that she gave him. My understanding would be that the reason that he would send brain tissue slides to a neuropathologist is because he believed that that individual would have more knowledge on the subject and would be better able to read the slides and determine exactly whatever could be gleaned from examining the slides. and that the reason that he would send them to some other doctor is because they would know more on the subject than he.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, he sent the samples to a doctor, an expert, obviously, and based on what he put in his report, he completely ignored everything that she told him.
Yeah, shit.
It's obvious when you read the words that she wrote in her report that it had been suggested prior to her examination of the slides that maybe Clayton had died of hypothermia. Because among what she wrote in her report, she said the following, quote, "In a death by hypothermia, I would not expect to see hypoxic ischemic neuronal changes, as the mode of death would include gradually dropping blood pressure with decreasing cerebral circulation. There would be no opportunity for hypoxic ischemic changes to develop, as recovery of blood pressure and reperfusion of cerebral circulation is essential to the development of the morphological changes of hypoxia ischemia. The appearances here are best described as agonal and autolytic with an asphyxial element." Now, I had to look up ischemia because I didn't know what that one meant. I knew that hypoxia and apoxic and hypoxic is the deprivation of oxygen, but I didn't know what ischemic meant, so I looked it up. And ischemia is defined as diminished blood supply to any tissue or organ of the body, causing a shortage of oxygen. So oxygen is delivered via the bloodstream. When there's no blood getting there, there's no oxygen getting there. Obviously, this doctor sees signs of asphyxia, or there would be no asphyxial element. She specifically used the term an asphyxial element. Now, obviously, asphyxial means referring to asphyxia. If there's an asphyxial element, then hypothermia cannot be the cause of death, because asphyxia and hypothermia have nothing to do with each other. She also says, "In death by hypothermia, I would not expect to see a hypoxic ischemic neuronal changes." So she did see hypoxic ischemic neuronal changes, which means that she saw signs of deprivation of oxygen and blood.
Right.
We wonder if the reason that the brain tissue slides have never come back to Nova Scotia is because they show an asphyxial element. If we don't have those slides in our possession, we can't prove that Clayton's brain showed an asphyxial element.
Well, they never sent those back or anything.
Well, it's an interesting thing, that question that you just asked, because there is currently, she's getting close to the end of a book. There's a woman who's been working on a book on Clayton's story for the last couple of years, and she's getting close to completion. And among the research work that she's done in preparation for the book, she attempted to have a conversation with Dr. Butt, and he was apparently quite obliging. They had substantial discussions over some of the issues in the case, and according to Dr. Butt, according to the author of the book, Dr. Butt told her that because the laws would require that those samples were returned to Nova Scotia, he believes that he would have returned those samples to Nova Scotia back then. However, the doctor who is currently the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia, he has claimed in a report that he wrote regarding Clayton's case that he was unable to acquire those slides. They've never come back to Nova Scotia by his report, and he claimed that discussions with Dr. Butt got him no further as far as learning the location of those missing brain tissue slides. Now, in the report written by Dr. Butt, he, as I mentioned earlier, he completely ignores what he was told by the doctor. Her name was Dr. Curry, who did this examination of the brain tissue slides. She's a neuropathologist, as I said earlier. Beyond Dr. Curry, the doctor who did the brain tissue examination, Dr. Butt also sent x-rays to an expert, a radiologist, when he got back to Calgary for his examination. His name was Dr. McDonald. One of the really interesting things about Dr. McDonald and his report, in his report he explains that he didn't have as many views of Clayton's skull as he would like to have had. It has been claimed that on the day that Clayton's body was taken to the hospital, when he was found in the brook and taken to the hospital on May 6, 1990, 2 New Waterford police officers took Clayton's body to the X-ray department. And it has been alleged that when they did, for reasons unknown, only 3 x-rays were actually created from the remains of Clayton Miller on that day. And they claim that the 3 x-rays that were produced were, one is a right lateral view of the skull, the side view. One is what they call AP, anterior to posterior view, which means front to back of the skull. So you're basically looking at the front of the skull. And the third is an AP, front to back view of Clayton's chest. Somehow, for reasons that have never been explained, no more than 3 x-rays were created of from Clayton's body that day. How that can be, I certainly can't understand or explain. No x-rays of his legs, no x-rays of his arms, no x-rays of the left side of his skull or the top or the back of his skull. It's a very strange thing how few x-rays were allegedly created that day. But what I find even more strange is the fact that despite creating new, clear x-rays of Clayton's skull during the re-autopsy procedure or following the re-autopsy procedure, the only view of Clayton's skull that was included from the re-autopsy x-rays was one referred to as a basal view, which would be a bottom-up view. If you took a skull and set it on a photocopier and made a photocopy of what you saw looking up from the bottom of the skull, that would be a basal view. So Dr. McDonald, the radiologist, was expected to determine the condition of the skull of Clayton Miller with no clear view of the back, no clear view of the left side, no clear view of the top. And the only 2 x-rays that were provided to him, which weren't the basal view, from the original autopsy, the original x-rays taken, are very poor quality. This, again, it's, why would it be? How can you explain if Dr. Butt wanted Dr. McDonald to be able to give him an accurate assessment of the condition of the skull of Clayton Miller, how does he not provide him with more x-rays when he has those x-rays in his possession? It doesn't make sense to me. How can he be expected to accurately evaluate the situation, as far as Clayton's skull, without enough views of it to be able to see it from all angles, to realize whether there's an issue with the left side or the back if he doesn't have a view of the left side or the back. But one thing I can tell you for sure is that based on two x-rays from the re-autopsy that were provided to the Miller family lawyer, Ray Wagner up in Halifax, in 2016. In August of 2015, a letter was sent to the chief medical examiner for the province after he had done a report on Clayton's case, allegedly a full review of the medical facts of Clayton's case. In his report, this doctor claimed to have examined all of the medical material evidence created since the death of Clayton Miller, and to have no belief that anything had been withheld or destroyed. So, if he's claiming that he has examined all of the medical material created since the death of Clayton Miller and has no reason to believe anything has been withheld or destroyed, then he's got all the material from the original autopsy, he's got all the material from the re-autopsy. And that would include tissue slides. The original autopsy, there was 17 or 18 original tissue slides created, and tissue blocks as well. A tissue block is a piece of tissue which is taken at autopsy. A small piece of it would be put between two pieces of glass to create a tissue slide, and what remains would be wrapped in paraffin wax and preserved for future testing if any is ever required. So there are tissue slides, tissue blocks, and x-rays created at the original autopsy. When the re-autopsy was done, there was an RCMP photographer present who videotaped the entire procedure and took photographs allegedly. There were new x-rays created. There were new tissue slides created and probably tissue blocks created. If Dr. Bose, who is the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia currently and who did the alleged examination or re-examination of the Clayton's files, if he was telling the truth when he claimed to have examined all of the medical material created since Clayton's death and had no reason to believe that anything was withheld or destroyed, then he should have examined all of that material, and all of that material should be in his possession as chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia. Clayton died in Nova Scotia. The re-autopsy was performed in Nova Scotia. All of that material should be in the office of the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia. And in his report, he claimed to have examined all of that material. However, when asked in a letter by the lawyer representing the family of Clayton Miller to provide an inventory of the physical material in his possession, he responded in August of 2015 by stating, "This consists of 14 tissue slides." So, when he claimed to have examined all of the material created since Clayton's death and had no reason to believe anything has been withheld or destroyed, he was completely bullshitting the public, because he didn't have any of that material, allegedly, at his disposal to have examined it. If, when he responds in a letter, when he says all he has in his possession is 14 tissue slides, then all he could have examined was 14 tissue slides. Why he claimed to have examined all the material created since Clayton's death, I have no idea. But it was certainly a false claim when he did so, because the vast majority of the material created since Clayton's death is unavailable, apparently. But somehow, between the time that he responded to the letter from Ray Wagner, and I believe it was August of 2015, claiming that all he had was 14 tissue slides, the following year he provides us with 2 clear x-rays of Clayton's skull, which have come from the re-autopsy. So, either something substantial has happened between the time that he's written his report and been unable to locate any of these x-rays, and the following year something has obviously happened there where he has become in possession of now of these x-rays from the re-autopsy. The initial question automatically comes to mind: where are the rest? If he's sending us two x-rays of Clayton's skull, where are the rest of the x-rays of Clayton's skull and of the rest of Clayton's body that were created at the re-autopsy? It's a strange thing. There's never been any explanation for where they came from, these two after the fact that came from the re-autopsy. There's been no explanation whatsoever of that. One of those two x-rays, which is the front-on view, front to back AP, they call it, anterior to posterior. To me, it shows very obvious signs of damage in Clayton's left eye socket especially, but his left cheek as well. It also shows without question that teeth are missing from the upper and lower jaw on the left side only. Surprisingly, it's the left side of Clayton's skull where the teeth are missing, where the eye socket to me appears to be damaged, and it also appears to me that there's a piece of bone missing from his left cheek area based on the x-ray. These injuries line up exactly with those that have been observed in pictures and photos that were taken of Clayton at the hospital as well. But the important thing that I wanted to get, one of the important things, there are so many of them in this, but what I want to get to is some of the things that were brought up by Dr. Butt when he did the re-autopsy on Clayton. And one of the very important things is that as far as Clayton's skull and the examination of it goes, in the introduction portion of his re-autopsy report, he specifies that among the objectives of performing the re-autopsy was, quote, re-inspecting the skull for fractures, unquote. Now, what seems to be unusual is the lack of actual detail provided regarding his, quote, unquote, re-inspecting of the skull, because what he actually said in his report regarding Clayton's skull was the head was x-rayed, quote, the head was x-rayed and the dentition noted to be entirely natural. Apparently, without restoration, a few teeth were missing, with the laxity of the teeth within the sockets, now in brackets, a quote, a post-mortem change, bracket, unquestionably the reason. So what he's claiming is a few of Clayton's teeth are missing. And the reason that they're missing, without any question, unquestionably the reason, is laxity of the teeth within the sockets, which is a post-mortem condition. Post-mortem condition means that it happened after death. So what he's claiming is the corpse of Clayton Miller, when the body is exhumed and the re-autopsy is performed, the corpse of Clayton Miller has a few teeth missing. And the reason that they're missing is because they got loose, basically, and fell out. This is the claim that's being made in this report. Clayton is known to have had absolutely perfect teeth. You see a picture of him, he's got the big smile, and there's no issues with his dentition, that's for damn sure. Now this guy is claiming that within between May 1990 and December of 93, what's that, 2.5 years, that Clayton's teeth have gotten loose to the point where they're falling out of the sockets within the casket. But the remarkable part of it all is that there is absolutely no mention, A, of how many teeth it is, B, of which teeth they are, whether it's an upper left molar or a lower right incisor or whatever the different options are. Or C, the fact that he found these teeth within the casket. If you are an individual who specializes in a science of any kind and is in a situation where you're going to put forward your supposition of whatever the subject may be, after you make your claim, you provide your proof or your whatever it is that your background material that you're falling back on to come to this conclusion. And in a case like this, there is absolutely no question whatsoever in my mind that if I was a medical person and I'm going to make a claim that these teeth fell out of the sockets from laxity, a post-mortem condition, my next statement is going to be, and I know that because I found these teeth within the skull or within the casket or wherever. But this doctor makes no mention at any time of finding the teeth. How can you possibly come across the country to perform a re-autopsy on someone whose parents believe that their child's death was the result of foul play, and say nothing more than a few teeth were missing, with laxity of the teeth within the sockets unquestionably the reason? Everything is questionable. That's why you're there. You're there to ask questions and to answer them, basically, for the family. In this case, he says there's there's a few teeth missing, but it happened after death. Absolutely no mention whatsoever of ever finding the teeth within the casket. Now, the other doctor who was present during the re-autopsy was allegedly there on behalf of the Miller family as an observer. His name is Dr. Michael Bodden, and he came here from New York. The reason that he came here from New York is because at that time the Miller family had hired a private detective from New Jersey, and he had recommended Dr. Bodden. There's absolutely no question that Dr. Bodden is, to this day, is still one of the top in his field in the world, and he's 80-some years old probably now. I was well aware of Michael Bodden before I ever heard tell of Clayton's case from watching crime programs on TV, A&E and different channels, and seeing Michael Bodden on there as an expert on a regular basis. He was one of three in those days in North America, or in the United States, that were the top of their field in the world. Dr. Bodden came on behalf of the Miller family, supposedly, and attended the autopsy conducted by Dr. Butt. And when Dr. Bodden wrote his report, he failed to mention anything about missing teeth. And this is someone who's there on behalf of the family. It is my belief that the reason that Dr. Bodden made no mention of missing teeth is because he realizes how ridiculous it would be to not follow it up with the fact that the teeth were found within the skull if it was a post-mortem condition. Despite realizing that Dr. Butt had mentioned the teeth in his report, Dr. Bodden made no mention whatsoever of them in his. Now, another very important detail with Dr. Butt and the radiologist, Dr. McDonald, who he sent the x-rays to from Clayton's for the examination, is that not only did Dr. McDonald explain the situation with the lack of proper skull x-rays with which to examine, to form a conclusion, he also told Dr. Butt in his report that there was bilateral subluxation bilaterally of both elbows. And what that converts to in the English language is both of Clayton's elbows are dislocated. Now, Dr. Butt sent the x-rays to the radiologist for his expert opinion, and his expert opinion is both elbows are dislocated. When Dr. Butt wrote his report, he made absolutely no mention whatsoever of Clayton's elbows. He did include the radiologist's report as an appendix at the end of his report, the same as he did with the neuropathologist who told that in death by hypothermia, she would not expect to see the things that she saw in Clayton's case, which were signs of asphyxiation and an asphyxial element. He completely ignored that as well. In the case of Dr. McDonald, the radiologist, he told him that there was dislocated elbows. He also told him that both lungs are, he says, quote, a previous film made of the chest on May 6, 1990 demonstrates that both lungs are completely aerated. Now, of course, not understanding exactly what that meant, I had to search it online. And an online search of the term aerated lungs resulted in a definition which stated, quote, aerated lungs are lungs that are overinflated or hyperinflated with air. This can happen when you can't exhale all of the air that's in your lungs and the air gets trapped and takes up space, unquote. If Clayton had died as a result of asphyxiation, then, and for instance, if that asphyxiation by any chance happened to come from somebody slapping a police chokehold on him or a sleeper hold because he wouldn't shut up, then Clayton would have been unable to exhale the air in his lungs, resulting in them being completely aerated, quote unquote, because the air in his lungs is unable to escape. The term that they use is either overinflated or hyperinflated, hyperinflation. The term hyperinflated is a familiar one because it appears in Dr. Butt's report. He says on page 5 of his report, there was no evidence of trapped air in the lungs. Example, as for asthma or hyperinflated.
Okay.
That's what he says. He literally says, quote, there was no evidence of trapped air in the lungs. Example, as for asthma or hyperinflated, unquote. And he makes this comment in his report after he's been informed by Dr. McDonald that the lungs were, quote, completely aerated or completely hyperinflated. He totally ignores the opinions given to him by the experts that he chose to examine Clayton's samples or x-rays. And the medical conclusion that he comes to regarding Clayton's death is totally contradictory to the conditions that those experts observed when they examined Clayton's samples. Another really crazy bit of it is the examination when he talks, as I mentioned earlier, about the examination of the skull. Where am I here? I'm trying to find this thing in the report itself. When he talks about what he saw as far as Clayton's skull goes, he says, where am I here now? About the laxity of the teeth. No, it's not that. Here we go. What Dr. Butt stated as far as when he examined the skull, he says, quote, a close examination of the inside of the skull revealed no evidence of fracture, old or recent. The inner ears were opened and thought to be free of hemorrhage externally and within, unquote. Now, the issue that I have with that statement is that nowhere in his report does he make any claim of any examination of the exterior of the skull. What he claimed was, quote, a close examination of the inside of the skull revealed no evidence of fracture, old or recent. But there is no further discussion anywhere of any examination of the exterior of the skull. if I'm correct about Clayton's eye socket being shattered, or a piece missing from his cheekbone, that wouldn't be observed during a close examination of the inside of the skull. And all he's claiming is that there is no evidence of fracture, old or recent, of the inside of the skull. But at no point, like I say, I'm repeating myself, I know, but at no point does he make any mention whatsoever of any further examination of the skull, of the exterior. The other somewhat mind-boggling point made here to me is that he states the inner ears were opened and then says they were thought to be free of hemorrhage, externally and within. If the inner ears were opened, why is there any doubt? How can there be any doubt? Did you look? If the inner ears are opened and examined, why would they only be thought to be free of hemorrhage? That part doesn't make any sense to me either. There's a lot of this. It's the details in the wording. Like for him to say, if he'll examine Clayton's skull thoroughly, interior and exterior, inside and out, and saw no signs of fracture, why was his sentence not a close examination of the skull revealed no evidence of fracture, old or recent? The fact that he includes the word inside of the skull, he's qualifying it, he's making it specific, and he's covering his ass. Because if somebody says, what about the big crack in the back of his skull, he could come back and say, well, I didn't say that there wasn't one. I just said that a close examination of the inside revealed no fracture. He makes no mention whatsoever of any examination of any other part of the skull, which I find to be unusual, especially when I compare, what Dr. Bodden had to say. Dr. Bodden is observing the exact same conditions, the same body, the same skull, the same everything that Dr. Budd is. And he's allegedly working on behalf of the family, the Miller family. He was well paid to be there, that's for sure. He says...
Good, man. That he ended up working with the family and stuff.
What's that again, buddy?
I said that's good that he ended up working with the family and stuff.
Well, it's not good when you realize what he actually said. He's supposed to be there on their behalf, but he comes away without mentioning anything about dislocated elbows or missing teeth of the victim, of the individual who he's supposed to be there representing the family of. And when it comes to the examination of the skull, what he says is the following, quote, "There are no post-mortem fractures of the facial or skull bones," unquote. It's just like Dr. Butt when he said a close examination of the inside of the skull. Dr. Bodden has just qualified his answer when he says there are no post-mortem fractures of facial or skull bones. Obviously, nobody is suspecting that after Clayton is dead, which is post-mortem, somebody would then fracture his facial or skull bones. What Dr. Bodden is saying is, I didn't see any fractures that took place after he was dead. Nobody would have suspected that you would. What he didn't say was, there are no fractures of the facial or skull bones. But if he had seen that, that's what he should have said. Instead, he said, there are no post-mortem fractures of the facial or skull bones. Do you see where I'm coming from with this?
I do.
Why did he not say there are no fractures of the facial or skull bones? And why did Dr. Butt not say a close examination of the skull revealed no evidence of fracture, old or recent? That's not what they said. By including a single word, in one case it's inside of the skull, or two or whatever, 3 words. In the other case it's post-mortem fractures of the facial or skull bones. By stating that the way that they've done it, they're basically covering their ass, saying, "Oh well, you can come back and say that," but what I actually said was this: the fact that they don't just straightforward say that they didn't see any fractures, to me, means there's a pretty good chance that they saw fractures. I've covered that. Those are things that I really wanted to get across. The other thing that I wanted to do, Chris, is to go back to just quickly point out, I mentioned earlier about how through the years, all of the doctors who have actually examined Clayton's physical material have come to the same conclusion as far as asphyxiation goes. Doctor and the terminology. Like I mentioned earlier, 1 month to the day after the initial autopsy was performed, Dr. Fraser up at the Camp Gill Hospital, he sent a report to Dr. Ikejani, and he was explaining his observations of what he had seen in the lung tissue samples. And what he said was, quote, "This lung tissue shows some air-expanded alveoli, but many are filled with pale edema-type fluid. Vessels are congested, and there is focal intraalveolar hemorrhage." Those are exactly the terms that came up. If you remember me earlier when I talked about the fact that at one stage I punched in a Google search of actual signs of death by asphyxiation, and the terms that it came back with what to look for microscopically in the lung tissue samples, and it gave 6 individual terms, and these are the terms: intraalveolar hemorrhage, vessels are congested, edema type fluid. Those are the terms that came back when I ran that search, and these are the terms that this doctor was using 1 month after Clayton died. This is what this expert up in Halifax, who's the pathologist here locally, sent them off to him for his expert opinion on what he saw, and that's what he saw. He included in what he saw he also said the following: "The edema and congestion present are probably of reflection only of sudden failure and non-specific in itself. Probably a reflection only of sudden failure." Sudden failure means Dr. Fraser believes that Clayton died suddenly, and hypothermia is not sudden.
No, that takes a while.
What he's saying here is he sees all these issues in Clayton's lungs, and that what he sees, the edema and the congestion, are probably a reflection only of sudden failure. Okay, so he's totally convinced that Clayton died quickly. And he's also convinced that Clayton's lungs show air-expanded alveoli filled with pale edema-type fluid, the vessels are congested, and there is focal intraalveolar hemorrhage. This is exactly the terminology that comes up when you search death by hypothermia, or death by asphyxiation, and they're totally inconsistent with death by hypothermia. The other one that I wanted to mention to you is Dr. Janigan. In the summer of 1992, Dr. Roland Perry, who at that time was the chief medical examiner for the province, he sent 17 slides of Clayton's tissue to a doctor named Janigan for his examination. And Dr. Janigan was the senior pathologist and professor at the Victoria General Hospital in Halifax, which is the top hospital in Nova Scotia. So you've got the top medical professional in the province, the chief medical examiner, Dr. Perry, sending off samples for examination by Dr. Janigan, who would certainly appear to be the senior pathologist in the province of Nova Scotia at that time. He's not just a his title says he's not just a senior pathologist, but he's also at that time a professor at the Victoria General Hospital in Halifax. So Dr. Janigan created a pathology report based on his evaluation of what he saw on the tissue on the slides, and he sent it back to Dr. Perry. As far as what he saw in Clayton's lungs, he said the following, quote, "The dominant changes are engorgement of arteries, veins, and alveolar capillaries, diffusely throughout all samples. patches of alveolar edema and collapse, which are present focally in all sections to varying degrees, overinflation of alveolar air spaces, goblet cell metaplasia. Some of this stuff is so freaking Greek I don't even pronounce it. The bottom line is, at the end of it, he says, comments, most organs showed acute congestion and the brain was heavy. The lungs additionally show patches of collapsed and alveolar edema, reflecting increased alveolar capillary permeability. Let me see now. There was the airway changes suggest smoking effect. The overinflation of alveolated tissue reflects abnormal respiratory effort, possibly with air trapping. This is the same thing that the other doctor mentioned, air trapping, because if he's being choked, air can't get out of his lungs. And when the air can't get out of his lungs work even harder to try and expel the air. You can't suck it in and you can't get it out because of the blockage, if it's either your occlusion or if you're being choked, whatever. And the result is overinflation or hyperinflated lungs, which is exactly what Dr. McDonald told Dr. Butt that he saw in the x-rays from the original x-rays of Clayton's chest. Diagnosis, this is the conclusion of the report by Dr. Janigan. Diagnosis, lungs, diffuse congestion, alveolar collapse, and edema, chronic bronchitis, bronchiolitis, overinflation. These terms that these doctors are using, and they used them from the beginning. From 1 month after Clayton died, Dr. Fraser gave his report. Dr. Janigan gave his a couple of years later in, what did I say it was, the summer of 92. Right up until the doctors that in 2015 in Brazil that examined Clayton's lungs, they all saw exactly the same thing. They are using exactly the same terminology to describe what they observed, and the terminology that they used is exactly the same terminology that comes back when I punched in a search of signs of death by asphyxiation. There's very little doubt, based on what these doctors have observed and their level of education and experience and whatever else, that there's a hell of a lot more evidence, opinions, and conclusions of death by asphyxiation than of death by hypothermia. And the current chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia should certainly, in my opinion, be having more work done on what samples he does have of Clayton's to come to an absolute establishment of a definite, undoubted cause of death, because the variations between death by asphyxiation and death by hypothermia are so extreme that it would appear to me that you would have to have gone into the experience with a preconceived notion of what your outcome would be in order to have ignored the expert opinions provided to you by those with much more experience and education than yourself, or you wouldn't have asked them for their opinions in the first place, by my judgment. The other thing that's very, I'm not sure what the term would be, eye-opening to me, let's say, is the fact that all of these doctors said the same thing. If any of them had provided different opinions, then maybe you could go a different way. But when you've got Dr. Fraser, Dr. Janigan, you've got two doctors in Brazil, the doctor that examined the x-rays, Dr. McDonald, told what he saw regarding the hyperinflated lungs, totally hyperinflated lungs. Then Dr. Butt writes his report and says basically that the lungs were normal. He says in his report that there was no foreign material in the lung tissue of Clayton Miller when he examined the slides from the original autopsy. And when those slides from the original autopsy were sent to the doctors in Brazil, they sent us back microscopic photographs of foreign material in Clayton's lungs and a very detailed description of the color of it and how it reacted under whatever type of light it was. While at the same time, Dr. Butt says there is no foreign material in Clayton's lungs. Okay, well, what's this? Did you think these doctors in Brazil just altered some kind of a photo here to send it back to us out of the blue, not knowing anything about this case? And somehow created the notion that there was a foreign object in Clayton's lungs? No, I don't think so. It seems to me a little more likely that quite possibly either Dr. Butt's examination and evaluation were not as complete as they maybe should have been, or he doesn't want to express the fact that he's observed something that is contrary to what he's going to claim is Clayton's cause of death. Despite the fact that he comes up with hypothermia as a cause of death, there is no actual presentation of, I believe that Clayton died of hypothermia and the reasons are A, B, C, D, E. There's no such thing. However, there is a very detailed list of such things from the doctor who was asked to consider the possibility that Clayton had died of hypothermia when he sent back his response to the RCMP saying, in the absence of the above, all these things that he did not observe at the time of the autopsy, it is impossible that Clayton Miller died from hypothermia. So I think we've pretty much covered the vast majority of the framework of it there, Chris. The main thing that I wanted to get across tonight is that after finally going through the medical details that have been in existence now for 36 years, and using Google searches to help to actually determine what was being stated, and comparing what was being stated to the results returned when I asked Google for signs of death by asphyxiation, and then read what it brought back to me as far as microscopic observations of the lungs. To me, there's a real good argument to be made here that it's clearly been presented already through all the years that Clayton's cause of death was asphyxiation, and that the government's position, based on the opinion of Dr. John Butt after his 1993 re-autopsy, is completely erroneous. There's absolutely no way that Clayton died of hypothermia, and very substantial evidence exists and has for all this time to support the fact that he died from asphyxiation.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that if it was hypothermia, like the other one said there, I mean, like you said, it's going to take a while, but I think that I just think he choked, or not choked, but yeah, he just couldn't breathe.
Something happened that he wasn't getting oxygen.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
When you combine that with the witness statement that says she was told the details of someone claiming to have put him out. I stopped him from screaming and hollering. I put his chokehold, what did he call him? I put the sleeper on him, he said, and put him out. Okay, well, if you add that to the mixture, it makes total sense that if he went a little overboard, he held it a little too long. Then when the police found Clayton on Friday night, shortly after this took place, because as I said, when this second serious assault took place, on Clayton, It's in the middle of a police raid. So another part of the story is the fact that 6 weeks to the day after Clayton's autopsy was performed, the police officer who most likely found him that night in an unconscious position or condition, or conceivably dead, that officer started a new job in Bedford 6 weeks to the day after Clayton died. And there is substantial evidence that I've developed over time that's either through what's in the files or from discussions with people that have come forward that I'm aware of. I am of the belief that the New Waterford police blamed one of their own for actions that he did not commit. I believe that the police officer who came along and found Clayton in very bad condition, if not actually deceased, was blamed for applying the damage, the injury, the assault, whatever, to Clayton. They blamed him for that because he was the type of person who would do exactly that for fun. Some of those New Waterford police officers at the time that were on that force were bad people. They were prone to unnecessary violence or excessive use of force. To the point where I believe, I'm not entirely sure about the number, but I believe it was 16 complaints of bad behavior by New Waterford police within the year or year and a half leading up to Clayton's death. It is entirely believable to me, it is what I believe in fact, that the New Waterford police blamed one of their own for something that he didn't do because he was the type of person who would, but in this particular instance he didn't. And as a result, serious efforts have been made ever since to cover up the details of what took place that weekend. I have little doubt that Clayton's body was dropped in the brook early on Sunday morning, approximately 5 o'clock, based on witness testimony. Witnesses that I've spoken with myself or been present when they're giving statements to others. I believe that officer was blamed for something he didn't do. He was kicked off the New Waterford police force and driven out of New Waterford. 2 days after Clayton's body was found, the two individuals who inflicted the damage to Clayton that probably ended up in his death, that based on my evaluation of the evidence, I'm totally convinced that Clayton died as a result of the beating that they put on him. Those two individuals were interviewed by RCMP 2 days after Clayton's body was found, and the alibis provided to the RCMP by them at that time were never checked up on, were never followed up on by the RCMP.
Oh,
and many years later, it was either 2003 or 2005, I believe, they were re-interviewed by RCMP, and during the second interview they were asked by RCMP whether or not, at the time of the first interview, the officers who interviewed them, they were asked whether or not the officers left the room and checked on your alibi to confirm what you told them. And they were told that they didn't know what they had done, that they had left the room a time or two, but they didn't know if they called, or they had never confirmed one way or the other. And despite the fact that those second group of officers who interviewed these same individuals many years later, despite the fact that they questioned whether or not the first officers had confirmed their alibi. When they provided the alibi the second time, the second officers also never checked up on the alibi. And the reason that we know that is because we know what the alibi was that they provided. They claimed to be at a separate party in a different part of town. And the Millers went to that person, the person that they identified as the host of the party. The Millers went there and questioned that person. And they asked, were these people at that party on that night? And they were told that they were there until they were observed. When the guy who owned the home spotted those guys there, he immediately told them they had to go. They were older than the people that were there. They were not friends. There was no reason for them to be there, basically, and they were told to leave, and they did leave. But when asked by the Millers whether or not this individual who had hosted the party was actually a high school graduation party for his daughter, if I recall correctly, when he was asked by the Millers if the RCMP had ever contacted him to check on whether or not these characters had been at the party, which they had provided as an alibi, he told them he had never been contacted by police regarding any of this episode. So, despite the second group of RCMP knowing that proper procedure is to check on the alibi to confirm it while you're interviewing the person, and asked whether the first group had done so, they didn't do so either. Why is the RCMP not checking the alibi of individuals that they're interviewing in connection to a suspicious death or a murder?
Yeah.
Well, maybe if they think that they know that somebody else did it instead. For instance, if the initial RCMP investigators who came to interview these two had been told prior, sometime that weekend, or maybe the day of the discovery of the body, or we don't know when. But if it's true that New Waterford police mistakenly believed that one of their own was guilty, it's entirely possible that they shared that with the RCMP at some stage. To me, something like that would be the only logical explanation for why the RCMP would not have followed up or confirmed the alibi provided by these two suspects when they interviewed them. If they had previously, before they even came to the meeting, if they had were they under the impression that they knew that someone else had had committed the crime, and that other person was a New Waterford police officer who did it by accident or whatever they may have been putting forward at the time, then they would probably not bother to waste their time on trying to confirm the alibi of these individuals that they're interviewing if they believe that they had nothing to do with it because they know who did it and it's somebody else. Other than that, if not that, I can't really explain why the RCMP is not checking on alibis. The other thing that came forward to me when I read the details of the second interview is that based on the questions that the interviewers were asking the suspects during the second interview, it appears obvious that no report was created by the two officers who interviewed them the first time after they had done the interview. Typically, I would expect police following the interview of suspects in a suspicious death, murder, manslaughter, whatever they might think of it conceivably, after an interview with those individuals, I would expect a report to have been written up concerning the interview, the call, the whole episode. But apparently there is no such report in the RCMP files, or if there was, the officers who interviewed these two suspects the second time wouldn't have had to ask some of the questions that they asked because those would have been contained within any report, any proper report that would have been written up following the initial interview in 1990. But if the RCMP were under the impression that a New Waterford police officer had accidentally done something that resulted in the death, then they'd literally be wasting their time, if they knew that to be true, to go making phone calls to someone to follow up on alibis from someone who realistically couldn't have been guilty if the supposition was correct that the Waterford police officer had committed the crime. It's quite a friggin' shit show, I'll tell you that, Chris. It's there's an incredible amount of evidence that the official story is not accurate. The Miller family, the way they've been treated is just, it's like, it makes no sense as far as their access to information or access to the physical samples or access to the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia currently. He claims that he has no knowledge of the actual whereabouts of the original autopsy report, Clayton Miller's original autopsy report by Dr. Riccajani, nor does he know of the current whereabouts of the medical examiner's report by Dr. Roach. Now, the medical examiner's report, the copy of the medical examiner's report that's been provided to the Miller family has an area within which has very obviously been altered. And the area of it that appears to be altered appears to have been describing injury. For reasons unknown, about a line and a half on the original medical examiner's report was whited out, and I mean whited out because you can literally see in one case about a half of the line that the text was inserted upon. Like it's a lined area on the page, and within these lines is where the information is to be typed. A line and a half of text was whited out, and half of one line of the actual line itself was even whited out, and then new text was inserted in that area. The new text that was inserted does not describe injury, despite the fact that the text around it appears to be describing injuries. The line previous to the one that's been removed describes Clayton's left arm, which was rotated slightly behind his back, and there is no mention whatsoever of his right arm. Now, an important detail is the fact that at the hospital, when Clayton's body had been taken there the day that it was found, one of the ambulance attendants told an RCMP member present that one of Clayton Miller's wrists were broken. And we know this from RCMP communications that relate that from one officer to another. Clayton's left arm was obviously left wrist was not broken. Clayton's left arm and wrist, there was nothing unusual about it, except for the fact that it was rotated slightly behind his back and he was found laying face down in a brook. His right arm, when his body was found, his right wrist was in a claw, like it's hooked. It's bent as far in as it can possibly be. And his right elbow is basically pointing away at shoulder height. Like if you're making wings out of your arm, you're doing a chicken wing kind of thing or something. That's what his right arm was like. As if his right hand had been, and when he was found, his right hand was located close to his neck and throat area. As if potentially, if someone had you in a chokehold and they start to apply the pressure around your neck, you're going to go with your right hand to try and make space to grab a hold of that and pull it away. That's basically the shape that Clayton's hand was in at the time. His right wrist was very sharply bent. And if, in fact, the ambulance attendant was correct, who stated that one of Clayton's wrists were broken, he would certainly have been describing his right wrist, not his left wrist. Now, in the medical examiner's report, there is a description of Clayton's left arm, but there is absolutely no mention whatsoever of the right. It's my belief that what was whited out and the text reinserted was the fact that Clayton's right wrist was broken. Whoever did the alteration on the medical examiner's report did not want that information to be conveyed, which is why it's been replaced, and to this day they claim that the original report is unavailable. So, in other words, all we have to go by is this one that we see that's been altered, and we have no original to compare it to see what the original looked like, or if the original looked like this. Because by my understanding of the presentation of technical information and presentations, reports, whatever all, something like that would certainly have required a notation, the initials of the individual who performed the alteration, or something of that nature, and some sort of a reference as to when and why that change had taken place. Because typically, my belief is that when an official document of that nature is being prepared, if there was a mistake and it needed to be altered, to be fixed, you wouldn't take white out and white it out the way that it's been done on this version of it. What you would have to do is start over again and retype or whatever. There is certainly no way that I believe the report that is presented now is the report that was created by Dr. Roach when he initially filled out the medical examiner's report. And the fact that we know without doubt that the medical examiner's report, which they claim to be unable to locate, was altered, it also makes me tend to believe that there's a very good probability that the original autopsy report, which contains nothing listed under cause of death, has also been altered. If they hadn't been altered, I believe they'd be available today. The fact that they claim that they're unable to locate them allows for no comparison between the versions that have been presented with the original version itself to see clearly whether or not what we've been given is an accurate representation of what was actually created in the first place. It just goes on and on with Clayton's case. At one stage, some years back, Maureen gave me a call on the phone one day, and she said, "You're not going to believe what I got right now." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, first of all, I'm at the regional hospital in Sydney, and I have a transfer form that shows that the regional hospital sent 18 blocks of Clayton Miller's tissue to Dr. Bose, the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia, in September of 2014, which is the time he announced that he was going to look into Clayton's case. In 2014, they sent 18 tissue blocks from the regional hospital in Sydney to the chief medical examiner's office in Halifax. And they were prepared by an individual who was the supervisor of the lab at the pathology department at the lab in the Cape Breton Regional Hospital. Now, this individual is preparing this material at the request of the top medical professional in the province, the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia, and he claims after we acquire this transfer form, the form states that the tissue samples are to be returned within 6 weeks to the lab where they've been provided from, and that the samples, when they return, should be accompanied by a report describing what was done while the samples were away. Now, after we received this, the Miller family lawyer sends a letter to the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia saying, "We want those tissue samples. We want them so we can have some new testing done on them to determine all we can possibly determine. And the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia comes back and says, oh yeah, by the way, those tissue blocks that were sent to me by the head of the pathology department at the lab at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, they're not actually Clayton's tissue samples at all. What? They're not? How do you know? He claims that he knows from a visual examination of those tissue blocks that those are not the tissue blocks of Clayton Miller. Now, an even more important, or not important, an even more interesting aspect to this is that, to this day, those tissue blocks, which he claims are not the tissue of Clayton Miller, remain in the custody of the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia, despite him claiming that they are not Clayton samples. We also know, I've had for years now all the communications from the Nova Scotia Health Authority regarding Clayton's case, and as a result, I know that there was never any further communication between Dr. Bowe's office, the chief medical examiner in Halifax. There was never been any further communication between his office and the Cape Breton Regional Hospital regarding tissue samples of Clayton Miller. What I'm saying is, despite him claiming that the tissue samples that he has are not Clayton's samples, so would have been sent to him mistakenly, there is no communication from his office back to the hospital, to the laboratory at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, asking for them to take another look, or expressing disappointment in receiving the wrong samples, or in communication of any sort. What we do have instead is, some years after those samples had been sent off to the doctor and to the chief medical examiner's office, a request was made of the Cape Breton Regional Hospital to check for any material they might have related to Clayton. And I have the emails back and forth between individuals at the hospital in which they claim that they remember putting a package together a couple of years prior, that it was for the chief medical examiner's office, and that they had never heard anything more. So obviously, if it was true that the samples that Dr. Bowes received when requesting samples for Clayton Miller were the samples of someone else, I would certainly have expected some sort of communication between his office and the hospital saying, take another look, or the samples that you sent me are not the samples I requested, or something. Instead of that, there is no communication. There is no returning of the samples within 6 weeks, as apparently the procedure is, which was stated on the release form. There's no report stating what was done with the samples that were sent, and the samples have never been returned. They were sent in September of 2014. We're now talking May of 2026. 12 years later, the samples have never been returned. So, bottom line is, they can't find Clayton's x-rays, they can't find his brain tissue slides, they can't find any other tissue blocks, they can't find the original re-autopsy report, they can't find the original medical examiner's report. The RCMP claim they can't find the report from the day that Clayton's body was found, that the investigator went to the scene and videotaped the scene and took measurements. They can't find that report. They also claim that they cannot find the photos and video of the re-autopsy, which were created by an RCMP officer present that day to do exactly that. If there's another case in Nova Scotia history with as much missing material or as many lost files or unexplained activities as there is in the case of Clayton Miller, I'd sure like to hear about it because I have my doubts that there ever would be. I think we've covered most of what needs to be covered, buddy.
I think so. And even like we covered a little bit of stuff that we did before too. But I mean, we're just recapping stuff, keeping things fresh.
If someone comes in with fresh, then they got to have some kind of an idea what we're talking about.
Well, exactly, right? So I mean, that's good. They'll get some explanation. No, and it's no problem talking on Clayton's case or anything, right? Like it's no problem at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, you'll be wanting to get the book when it comes out pretty soon.
Yeah, definitely checking that out for sure.
It's going to be called Unredacted.
That's what it's going to be called.
The Clayton Miller story, yeah, or something to that effect.
That'd be cool. No, that'll be good.
She's sure gotten into it. Holy shit, man! She talked to way more people than any police ever have. And almost everybody that she's contacted, they've talked to her. She talked to Dr. Bodden and Dr. Butt, and Dr. Butt told Ray Wagner's office, or Richard, who works there. He told him straight out, "Don't you ever call me again and talk about this case, because I don't want to ever talk about this case again." Why would you say something like that?
Oh, shit. Yeah, just decline peacefully, you know what I mean?
Why would you have any issues? Why what do you answer the questions? Why wouldn't you? If someone's calling and looking for tissue samples, and you're the last one to have them, okay, well, what's the problem? Why don't you just tell us where they are or what you did with them?
Yeah, we'll figure that out, right?
Whatever is right.
Oh, what I do hope something comes from this, like even with the book coming and everything, and you know what I mean?
Yep. In that case, it's almost 12:30 here. I think I'll shut her down and hit the head.
Oh, shit. Yeah, no, thanks for hopping on, man. I really appreciate it, dude.
Buddy, it's definitely both ways. Oh, there's my laptop telling me my battery's running low. A sure sign I'm right. Okay, my friend, I'll call it a night.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you for popping on. I'll edit this between tomorrow and whatever fucking the day follows. I'll have this up the weekend for sure, because I got a couple things to work on.
Talk to you soon.
Later, bye.
Bye-bye.
Twisted Tales.